The space around the dead planet Korath Prime looked like a graveyard of metal and dreams. Broken ships floated in the cold darkness, their hulls torn open like wounded animals. Some were still burning, their fires feeding on the oxygen net, leaked from cracked life support systems. Others were already cold, their crews long dead, adding to the countless bodies that had been claimed by this war. Admiral Vex Thara stood on the bridge of her flagship, the luminous Dawn. She was tall and thin, like all her people, with skin that seemed to glow with a soft blue light. Her large eyes, which could see colors that other species could not even imagine, watched the battle raging in front of her. The Zephyrians had been fighting this war for so long that she could barely remember what peace felt like. The enemy ships moved like angry metal beasts across the starfield. The Korthiks had built their vessels to look dangerous, with sharp edges and dark colors that seemed to swallow light. Their weapons fired streams of red plasma that could melt through the strongest armor. When those beams hit a Zephyrian bioship, the living hull would scream in frequencies that only her people could hear. Vex Thara pressed her long fingers against the smooth surface of her command console. The ship responded to her touch, showing her the battle data flowing through its organic circuits. 312 years. That was how long this war had been going on. 312 years of death and destruction, of planets burned and civilizations destroyed. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her, back when she was just a child, learning to commune with the great bioships. The war had started over something so small, so meaningless now. Mining rights to some crystals in the Tau Ceti system. But the first blood spilled had demanded more blood in return. The first ships destroyed had called for revenge. And so it went, year after year, decade after decade, century after century. On the other side of the battle, General Kroven watched the same fight from his command ship, the Iron Fist. He was shorter and wider than the Zephyrians, built like a block of living metal. Half of his face was covered with cybernetic implants that glowed with soft red lights. His left arm had been replaced with a mechanical limb that could crush steel, a souvenir from a battle 20 years ago. The Korthiks believed that flesh was weak, that only by joining with machines could they become truly strong. Kroven's people had replaced parts of themselves with technology until they were more machine than biological. Their ships reflected this philosophy, built from the hardest metals they could find and armed with weapons that could crack moons. Kroven's artificial eye tracked the Zephyrian bioships as they moved through space like living creatures. He hated how they seemed to dance rather than fly, how they curved and flowed instead of moving in straight lines like proper warships should. Everything about the Zephyrians offended his sense of military order. The tactical display in front of him showed the current battle status. His third armada had been fighting the Zephyrian fleet for 6 months now, and neither side had gained a clear advantage. They would win a battle, then lose the next one. They would take a planet, then be forced to abandon it weeks later. The war had become a grinding machine that consumed ships and lives, but produced nothing except more reasons to keep fighting. Both commanders had heard the rumors. Of course, strange stories filtering through the intelligence networks about a new species somewhere in the outer regions. The reports were confusing and contradictory. Some said these newcomers were primitive, barely able to travel between stars. Others claimed they possessed technology that defied understanding. The species called itself humanity, according to the few reliable reports. They came from a small yellow star in what had previously been considered empty space. No one knew how long they had been there or how they had remained hidden for so long. Most intelligence analysts dismissed them as irrelevant, just another minor species that would eventually be absorbed or destroyed by one of the major powers. Vex Thara had read some of these reports with mild curiosity. The descriptions painted a picture of beings that seemed almost childlike in their approach to galactic politics. They apparently tried to talk their way out of conflicts instead of fighting. They formed alliances based on something they called mutual benefit rather than fear or domination. It all sounded very naive to someone who had spent her entire adult life at war. The Zephyrians had evolved on a world where cooperation was necessary for survival. Their biotechnology required harmony between the living components, a balance that could only be maintained through careful management. But 3 centuries of war had changed them, made them suspicious and defensive. They trusted only their own kind now, and sometimes not even then. Krovin's people had a different history. The Korthiks came from a harsh world where only the strong survived. They had learned to replace their weak flesh with strong metal, to think like machines rather than animals. War was natural to them, a way of proving their strength and taking what they needed. The long conflict with the Zephyrians had only reinforced their belief that the universe was a place where you either conquered or were conquered. The current battle was typical of how the war had evolved. Both fleets moved in patterns that had and refined over decades of combat. The Zephyrians used their bioship's flexibility to avoid the worst of the Korthik firepower while striking at weak points with living weapons that could adapt to enemy defenses. The Korthiks relied on overwhelming firepower and heavy armor, accepting losses in exchange for the chance to land devastating blows. Neither side could win a decisive victory because both had learned to counter the other's strengths. The Zephyrian bioships could heal from damage that would cripple a metal vessel, but they were vulnerable to certain frequencies of energy that the Korthiks had learned to exploit. The Korthik ships were nearly indestructible when properly supported, but their rigid tactics made them predictable to experienced Zephyrian commanders. The war had settled into a pattern as regular as breathing. Battles were fought, ships were lost, planets changed hands, and the cycle continued. Young officers on both sides studied the tactics of previous generations, learning the approved methods for killing their enemies efficiently. The war had become an institution, a way of life that neither side could imagine ending. Both Vextara and Krovin were products of this system. They had been trained from childhood to fight this war, to hate their enemies, to see victory as the only acceptable outcome. They were good at their jobs, competent commanders who understood their roles in the great machine of destruction that the conflict had become. But on this day, as they watched their fleets tear each other apart in the space around a dead world, neither of them could have imagined that change was coming. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, a small ship was approaching their battle zone. Its crew had never heard of the Zephyrian Korthik War, had never seen the terrible weapons that these ancient enemies used against each other. The ship was human, and its captain was about to do something that would change the course of galactic history. Not through superior weapons or advanced technology, but through something far more powerful and unexpected. He was going to try to end the war not by winning it, but by convincing both sides that they didn't need to fight at all. The Battle of Koreth Prime was about to become the last battle of the longest war in galactic history, and the beings who would end it had never fired a shot in anger. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the Hughes Resolute, watching the stars streak past as his ship traveled through hyperspace. He was a man of medium height with brown hair that was starting to show gray at the temples. His uniform was clean and pressed, but his eyes showed the tiredness that came from 6 months of deep space exploration. The Resolute was not a warship, though it carried enough weapons to defend itself if needed. It was built for exploration and scientific research, with laboratories and sensor arrays that could analyze anything from distant stars to alien microbes. The ship's crew of 200 people represented the best that Earth had to offer, scientists and engineers and soldiers all working together. Morrison had been a space captain for 15 years, ever since humanity had first learned to travel. faster than light. He had seen the birth of new colonies, the discovery of alien ruins, and the slow expansion of human civilization into the galaxy. But he had never seen anything like what his sensors were showing him now. Lieutenant Commander. Lisa Baker stood at the tactical station, her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail. She was younger than Morrison, but had more experience with military operations. Her job was to keep the ship safe, to spot dangers before they could hurt the crew. Right now, she was staring at her displays with a look of complete confusion. "Captain," she said, her voice tight with tension, "you need to see this." Morrison got up from his chair and walked over to her station. The tactical display showed energy readings unlike anything in their databases. Massive power signatures that suggested weapons capable of destroying entire planets. Dozens of them, all concentrated in the same area of space. "How far out are we?" Morrison asked. "About 2 light hours from the source," Baker replied. "Whatever is happening over there, it's big, really big." Ensign Tom Phillips, the communications officer, looked up from his station. He was fresh out of the academy, still excited about everything he saw in space. But right now, he looked worried. "Sir, I'm picking up radio transmissions from the same area. They're not in any language I recognize, and the computer can't translate them. But the patterns suggest military communications." Dr. Amy Chun, the ship's xenobiologist, had been called to the bridge when the strange readings first appeared. She was a small woman with dark hair and quick, intelligent eyes. Her job was to study alien life forms, but she had never expected to find any that were still alive and active. "The energy signatures are consistent with advanced technology," she said, studying her portable scanner. "Far beyond anything we've developed. If these are weapons, they could probably destroy our entire solar system." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. Humanity had always known that other intelligent species existed somewhere in the galaxy. They had found ruins and artifacts that proved it. But they had never encountered any that were still alive, still building, still fighting. "Drop us out of hyperspace," Morrison ordered. "I want to see what we're dealing with before we get any closer." The Resolute shuddered slightly as it returned to normal space. The stars stopped streaking and became points of light again. But ahead of them, something was happening that made the stars seem dim by comparison. The main screen lit up with the image of a battle. Hundreds of ships were fighting each other across millions of kilometers of space. Weapons that could crack planets were being fired back and forth, creating explosions that outshone the local sun. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Morrison had seen war before. He had been a young officer during the Colony Rebellion, when some of the outer settlements had tried to break away from Earth. He thought he understood what battle looked like. But this was something different, something bigger and more terrible than anything humans had ever created. "My God," whispered Baker. "How long have they been fighting?" "The debris field suggests this has been going on for a very long time," Dr. Chon said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some of those wrecks look like they've been drifting for decades. The ships were like nothing they had ever seen. Some looked almost alive, flowing and curving like sea creatures swimming through space. Others were angular and mechanical, built from metal and armed with weapons that glowed with their own inner fire. Both types were locked in a deadly dance, trading destruction with the skill that came from long practice. Morrison watched a ship that looked like a giant flower bloom with light as it died. Another vessel, shaped like a sword made of dark metal, exploded in a ball of fire that briefly created a new star. The battle was so far away that the light from these explosions had taken minutes to reach them, but even at this distance, the energy readings were overwhelming. "Sir," Phillips said, his voice cracking slightly, "I think I'm starting to understand some of the transmissions. The computer is finding patterns, making connections. There are at least 2 different languages being used, maybe more. Can you tell what they're saying? Morrison asked. Some of it. Battle commands mostly. Coordinates, target assignments, damage reports. Standard military communications. Phillips paused, listening to something only he could hear through his earpiece. Sir, they're not just fighting. They're talking to each other, too. Insults. Threats, challenges. This isn't just a battle. It's personal. Dr. Chun was studying the biological readings from the organic-looking ships. Captain, these aren't machines. Some of these vessels are actually alive. Living creatures that have been modified or bred for war. I've never seen anything like it. Baker was tracking the tactical situation, trying to understand the flow of battle. Both sides seem evenly matched. They're using completely different technologies, but the effectiveness is about the same. This could go on for hours, maybe days. Morrison made a decision that would change everything. He could have ordered the ship to retreat, to return to Earth and report what they had found. That would have been the safe choice, the smart choice. But something about the endless destruction he was witnessing made him want to do something more. Open a channel, he said. All frequencies. Sir? Phillips looked confused. You heard me. I want to talk to them. Captain, Baker said urgently, we don't know anything about these species. They might see us as a threat. They might attack us. Look at them, Morrison said, gesturing toward the screen. They're destroying each other over something that happened God knows how long ago. Maybe they've forgotten why they started fighting. Maybe they just need someone to remind them that there are other options. Dr. Chun looked at him with something like admiration. You want to try to stop a war between species we've never met, using technology we don't understand over a conflict we know nothing about. That's exactly what I want to do, Morrison said. Phillips worked at his console, opening communication channels across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. The Resolute began broadcasting a simple message in multiple languages, mathematical sequences that any intelligent species should be able to understand. The response was immediate and alarming. Both fleets stopped firing at each other and turned, their attention to the small human ship that had just announced its presence. Suddenly, hundreds of the most powerful warships in the galaxy were all pointing their weapons at the Resolute. Incoming transmissions, Phillips reported. Multiple. Sources, multiple languages. The computer is trying to translate, but it's having trouble with the syntax. What's the general tone? Morrison asked. Hostile. Very hostile. They want to know who we are, what we're doing here, and why we shouldn't be destroyed immediately. Morrison smiled grimly. Well, at least they're talking instead of shooting. That's a start. The bridge crew looked at their captain with a mixture of admiration and terror. They were one small ship facing hundreds of alien warships, and their captain was treating it like a diplomatic opportunity. Sir, Baker said quietly, what's the plan here? Morrison looked at the battle-scarred fleets surrounding them, then at his crew. These were good people, brave people who had followed him into the unknown. They deserved to know what he was thinking. The plan, he said, is to do what humans do best. We're going to talk to them. We're going to listen to them. And we're going to find out why they're killing each other. And if they decide to kill us instead? Baker asked. Morrison shrugged. Then at least we'll die trying to do something good. The alien fleets were moving closer now, their weapons charging, their crews preparing for battle. But Morrison wasn't preparing for battle. He was preparing for the most important conversation in human history. The alien voices filled the bridge of the Resolute, speaking in languages that sounded like music mixed with machine noise. The computer worked frantically to translate, displaying words and phrases on screens around the command center. Most of it was threats and demands, but Morrison could sense something else underneath the anger. Curiosity. "Captain," Philip said, sweat beading on his forehead, "I think I have partial translation working. The First Fleet is calling us parasites and demanding we identify ourselves. The Second Fleet is using words the computer translates as meat, creatures, and system invaders." Morrison stood in the center of his bridge, surrounded by displays showing hundreds of alien warships. Any one of those vessels could destroy his entire ship with a single shot. But instead of fear, he felt something else. Opportunity. "Tell them we are humans from Earth," Morrison said calmly. "Tell them we come in peace, and we want to understand why they are fighting." Baker looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Sir, with respect, that's not going to work. These species have been trying to kill each other for who knows how long. They're not going to stop just because we ask nicely." "Maybe not," Morrison replied. "But they stopped shooting at each other when we showed up. That means they can stop. They just need a reason." Dr. Chun was studying the readings from both fleets. "Captain, I'm detecting massive power buildups in their weapon systems. If they decide to fire, we won't survive long enough to learn from our mistake." Morrison made a decision that would have seemed insane to any military commander in human history. He turned to Phillips and said, "Tell both fleets that we surrender." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. Every member of the crew stared at their captain as if he had suddenly started speaking in an alien language. "Sir?" Phillips asked weakly. "You heard me. Tell them we surrender. Tell them we want to come aboard their ships and talk to their commanders." Baker stepped forward, her voice urgent. "Captain, we can't surrender to both sides of a war. That's not how surrender works." "It is for us," Morrison said. "Tell them we want to meet with both commanding officers at the same time. Tell them we have information that might interest them." Phillips's hands shook as he transmitted the message. The response from both fleets was immediate and confused. The computer struggled to translate the rapid exchanges, but the general meaning was clear. Neither side understood what the humans were trying to do. Morrison had gambled that neither alien fleet had ever encountered a species that surrendered without being defeated. In their experience, surrender meant defeat, meant weakness, meant the end of resistance. But Morrison wasn't surrendering from weakness. He was surrendering from strength, the strength that came from having nothing to prove and everything to offer. "Admiral, Vexthara received the human message aboard her bioship with complete bewilderment. In 3 centuries of war, no one had ever voluntarily made themselves vulnerable to both sides of a conflict. The concept was so alien to her that she had trouble even understanding what the humans were proposing. Her tactical officers were arguing among themselves, their voices creating harmonies that would have been beautiful if they weren't discussing the best way to destroy the unknown vessel. Some wanted to capture the humans for interrogation. Others suggested immediate destruction to eliminate a potential threat, but Vexthara was curious. These beings had appeared from nowhere, positioned themselves between 2 hostile fleets, and then offered to surrender to both sides simultaneously. It was either the most brilliant tactical move she had ever seen, or the most foolish. Either way, she wanted to understand it. On the Iron Fist, General Croven was having similar thoughts. His cybernetic brain processed thousands of tactical scenarios, trying to understand what advantage the humans might gain from this strange maneuver. Every analysis came back with the same result. The humans had placed themselves in a position where they could be destroyed instantly by either fleet. Croven's officers were less confused than angry. They saw the human offer as either a trick or an insult. Why would anyone surrender without being forced to? It went against everything they understood about warfare and survival. But like his Zephyrian counterpart, Croven was intrigued despite himself. These humans had done something unprecedented. They deserved at least a moment of his attention before. He decided whether to kill them or capture them. The two fleet commanders found themselves in an unusual position. For the first time in decades, they were considering the same problem from the same perspective. Both wanted to understand what these strange newcomers were really trying to accomplish. Morrison waited on his bridge, while the alien fleets discussed his offer. He could see the energy signatures of their weapons, still charged and ready to fire. His crew looked at him with expressions ranging from admiration to terror. They trusted him, but they also thought he might be leading them all to their deaths. "Sir," Dr. Chon said quietly, "I'm reading massive communication activity between the two fleets." "They're talking to each other." Morrison smiled grimly. "Good. That means they're thinking instead of just reacting." "What makes you so sure they won't just blow us up?" Baker asked. "Because they're curious," Morrison replied. "Intelligence requires curiosity. And any species smart enough to build ships, like those, is smart enough to wonder why we're doing something that seems so stupid." The answer came 30 minutes later. Both fleets agreed to Morrison's proposal, but with conditions. The humans would be allowed to send representatives to both flagships, but those representatives would be considered prisoners, not diplomats. Any hostile action would result in the immediate destruction of the human vessel. Morrison accepted the terms without hesitation. He selected his away teams carefully. Commander Baker would accompany him to the Zephyrian ship, while Chief Engineer Pete Rodriguez would join him for the meeting with the Corthics. Both were experienced officers who could think on their feet. Dr. Chun would remain on the Resolute to coordinate between the teams and provide scientific analysis. The rest of the crew would maintain the ship and be ready to transmit their findings back to Earth, assuming they survived long enough to make a report. The transfer was accomplished using the aliens' own technology. The Zephyrian bioship extended what looked like a living tentacle to embrace part of the Resolute's hull. A sensation was disturbing, but not painful, like being gently squeezed by something vast and alive. The Korthak method was more mechanical, but equally impressive. A metal tube extended from their ship and clamped onto the human vessel with perfect precision. The engineering was flawless, demonstrating a level of technology that made human achievements seem primitive by comparison. Morrison found himself standing in two different alien environments within minutes of each other. The Zephyrian ship felt alive, with walls that seemed to breathe and floors that gave slightly under his feet. The air was warm and humid, filled with scents that reminded him of flowers and ozone. The Korthak vessel was the opposite, all hard angles and metal surfaces. The air was cool and dry, recycled through systems that removed every trace of organic contamination. The lighting was harsh and bright, designed for cybernetic eyes rather than biological ones. Both environments were completely alien, but Morrison felt more comfortable than he had expected. Humans were adaptable, and he was starting to understand that this adaptability might be their greatest weapon in the coming negotiation. Admiral Vexthara met him in what appeared to be a garden growing inside her ship. She was tall and graceful, with skin that glowed with its own inner light. Her large eyes studied him with an intelligence that was both alien and familiar. General Croven received him in a command center filled with screens and tactical displays. Half of his face was machine, glowing with red lights that tracked Morrison's every movement. His presence was intimidating, but Morrison could sense the curiosity behind the mechanical facade. Both alien commanders had the same question. What did the humans want? Morrison's answer was simple and revolutionary. He wanted them to stop killing each other. The reaction from both sides was immediate and identical. Laughter, not human laughter, but the alien equivalent, sounds that expressed the same mixture of disbelief and amusement. But Morrison wasn't discouraged. He had expected this reaction. Now came the hard part, convincing two ancient enemies that peace was not only possible, but profitable. Morrison stood in the living garden aboard the Zephyrian flagship, facing Admiral Vexthara, across a table that seemed to be grown from the ship itself. The air smelled like flowers after rain, and the walls pulsed gently with the rhythm of some vast heartbeat. It was beautiful and alien, and completely unlike anything humans had ever built. "You ask us to stop fighting," Vexthara said, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "But you do not understand what you ask. This war is older than your entire species. It is part of who we are." Morrison pulled out a small tablet from his uniform pocket. The device looked primitive compared to the organic technology surrounding him, but it contained something that might change everything. Information. "Admiral, may I show you something?" he asked. Vexthara tilted her head, curious despite herself. Morrison activated the tablet, and holographic images began to appear above its surface. Pictures of Earth, of human cities, of wars and peace treaties and handshakes between former enemies. "This is our world," Morrison said, "and these are our wars." The images showed the worst of human history. World wars that killed millions, genocides that nearly destroyed entire peoples, weapons that could burn cities to ash. Vexthara watched with growing surprise as Morrison displayed humanity's capacity for violence and destruction. "We have fought wars that lasted decades," Morrison continued. "We have hated each other for reasons that seem just as important as yours. We have built weapons to destroy our enemies and use them without mercy." "Then you understand," Vexthara said. "You know that some wars cannot end until one side is completely destroyed." "No," Morrison said quietly. "That's what we thought too, but we were wrong." The holographic display changed, showing different images now. Peace negotiations, reconstruction efforts, former enemies working together. Pictures of German and Allied soldiers shaking hands after World War II, of American and Russian astronauts embracing in space, of ancient tribal enemies becoming trading partners. "We learned something that changed everything," Morrison said. "We learned that winning a war is not the same as solving a problem." Meanwhile, on the Korthik flagship, Chief Engineer Rodriguez was having a similar conversation with General Crovin. The command center was filled with screens showing tactical data, weapon readiness reports, and fleet positions. Everything was precise, efficient, and deadly. Crovin's cybernetic eyes studied the human engineer with mechanical precision. "Your captain sends me a mechanic to discuss war," he said, his voice a mixture of organic vocal cords and electronic enhancement. "Does he not understand that this is a matter for warriors?" Rodriguez smiled and pulled out his own tablet. "General, I think you might be surprised by what a mechanic can teach you about war." The images that appeared showed human manufacturing plants, assembly lines, and industrial complexes. But these weren't weapons factories. They were plants that had been converted from making bombs to making cars, from producing artillery shells to manufacturing farm equipment. "After our biggest war," Rodriguez explained, "we had a choice. We could keep building weapons to fight the next war, or we could build something else. We chose to build." Crovin leaned forward, his mechanical components whirring softly. "You converted your war machine to peaceful purposes." "More than that," Rodriguez said. "We invited our former enemies to help us. The countries that had been trying to destroy each other started working together. They shared technology, resources, knowledge. Within a generation, they were allies." "Impossible," Crovin said flatly. "Warriors do not become friends. Enemies do not share their secrets." Rodriguez changed the display to show international space stations, joint military exercises, and cooperative research projects. "General, the same countries that were bombing each other in 1945 sent astronauts to the moon together in 1969. 24 years from total war to complete cooperation." Back on the Zephyrian ship, Morrison was explaining game theory to Admiral Vexthara. He used simple diagrams to show how cooperation could benefit both sides more than competition. Imagine two farmers, Morrison said. They can fight over the same field, destroying the crops and gaining nothing. Or they can work together, plant different crops, and both eat well. But resources are limited, Vexthara replied. If one side takes more, the other must have less. Morrison smiled and activated a new file on his tablet. That's what we thought too. Until we learned to make the pie bigger instead of fighting over the pieces. The display showed the crystal formations that had originally caused the war between the Zephyrians and Cortex. Then it showed similar formations in human space, dozens of them, all unmined and unexploited. You've been fighting over scarce resources, Morrison said, but they're not scarce. You just haven't been looking in the right places. Vexthara stared at the display in shock. The crystals that her people and the Cortex had been dying for were apparently common throughout this region of space. The humans had simply never needed them, so they had never bothered to mine them. On the Cortex ship, Rodriguez was showing Crovin the same information. Your war started over mining rights, he said. But look at this. The display showed detailed surveys of crystal formations in human territory. Enough rare crystals to supply both civilizations for thousands of years, just waiting to be harvested. We don't need these crystals, Rodriguez explained. Our technology developed differently, but we'd be happy to share the locations in exchange for some of your knowledge. Crovin's organic eye widened while his cybernetic one focused intently on the data. You would give us the location of these resources for free? Not for free, Rodriguez said. For trade. We give you crystal locations. You give us manufacturing techniques. We give you access to our space. You give us access to your knowledge. Everyone wins. Morrison was making a similar proposal to Admiral Vexthara. Your biotechnology could revolutionize our medicine, he said. Our agricultural techniques could help you feed more people. Instead of spending resources on weapons, we could all spend them on making life better. Vexthara was silent for a long moment, her large eyes reflecting the soft glow of her ship's living walls. You speak of things that have never been tried between our species. Because no one has ever tried, Morrison replied. Your people. And the Cortex have been so focused on fighting each other that you never looked for alternatives. And you believe this could work? Morrison nodded. I believe it has to work. The alternative is that you keep killing each other until there's no one left to kill. On both ships, the alien commanders were struggling with concepts that challenged everything they believed about warfare and survival. The idea that enemies could become allies, that cooperation could be more profitable than conquest, was revolutionary. Dr. Chan's voice crackled over Morrison's communicator. Captain, I'm detecting unusual activity in both fleets. They're communicating with each other directly, not just through us. Morrison felt a surge of hope. That's the first step, he said to Vexthara. Your people and the Cortex are talking to each other for the first time in generations. Rodriguez reported similar observations from the Cortex ship. General, your fleet and the Zephyrian fleet are exchanging communications. What are they saying? Crovin consulted his tactical displays. They are discussing your proposals. My commanders are skeptical, but they are listening. And the Zephyrians? They are also skeptical, but they are not preparing to attack. That is unusual. Morrison realized that something fundamental had changed. For the first time in centuries, both fleets were considering options other than violence. They were thinking instead of just reacting. Admiral, Morrison said to Vexthara, would you be willing to speak directly with General Crovin? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vexthara had not spoken directly to a Cortex commander in over 200 years. What would we say to each other? She asked. Whatever you want, Morrison replied. But say it as people, not as enemies. Similar conversations were happening on both ships. The idea was taking root that maybe, just maybe, there was another way forward. The war that had raged for centuries was about to face its greatest test. Not from superior weapons or brilliant tactics, but from the simple human belief that any problem could be solved if people were willing to talk to each other. The moment that would change galactic history began with a simple question. Morrison looked at Admiral Vexthara and asked, "When did you last speak to a Korthic as a person instead of an enemy?" Vexthara's glowing skin dimmed slightly as she considered the question. "I do not remember," she said finally. "Perhaps never. We communicate only to demand surrender or threaten destruction." "Then maybe it's time to try something different," Morrison said gently. On the Korthic flagship, Rodriguez was asking General Croven the same question. The cyborg general's mechanical eye clicked as it focused on different distances, a sign that he was thinking deeply. "My grandfather once told me stories," Croven said slowly. "Before the war became total, there were times when our species traded with each other, shared knowledge. But that was before my time." "It could be again," Rodriguez said. "All it takes is one conversation." Morrison activated his communicator. "Dr. Chun, can you set up a three-way holographic conference? I want Admiral Vexthara and General Croven to see each other while they talk." "Already working on it, Captain," came Chun's reply. "The technology is compatible. Give me 2 minutes." Those 2 minutes felt like hours. Morrison could see the uncertainty in Vexthara's large eyes. This was a being who had spent her entire adult life treating Korthics as monsters to be destroyed. Now she was being asked to see one as a person. On the Iron Fist, Croven was experiencing similar doubts. His cybernetic implants had been designed partly to help him hate more efficiently, to see enemies as targets rather than living beings. Now he was being asked to do the opposite. The holographic projectors activated simultaneously on both ships. For the first time in over 2 centuries, a Zephyrian admiral and a Korthic general found themselves face to face without weapons between them. The silence stretched for several seconds. Both commanders studied each other, seeing details that had been lost in long-range battle communications. Vexthara noticed that Croven's organic eye was tired, marked by the stress of endless war. Croven saw that beneath her alien beauty, Vexthara carried the same burden of command that he did. "You look older than I expected," Vexthara said finally. "War ages us all," Croven replied. "I have been fighting your people for 43 years. How long have you commanded against us?" 37 years, Vexthara answered. "Since my predecessor died at the Battle of Rigel 7. "Commander Yexmora," Croven said, surprising her. "I remember that battle. She fought well. Her sacrifice allowed 3 of your bioships to escape." Morrison and Rodriguez exchanged glances. The 2 alien commanders were talking about their war as soldiers, with a respect that transcended species. "You knew her name," Vexthara said softly. "We know the names of worthy opponents," Croven replied. "It is the only honor we can give them." The conversation continued, cautious at first, but growing more open. Both commanders realized they had more in common than they had differences. They were both career military officers who had inherited a war they did not start. They both carried the weight of countless deaths, the responsibility for decisions that had cost millions of lives. "Why do we fight?" Vexthara asked suddenly. "I mean, why do we really fight? Not the official reasons, but the real ones." Croven's cybernetic components hummed as he processed the question. "Because we have always fought. Because our people expect us to fight. Because stopping would mean admitting that all the deaths were meaningless." "But what if they were not meaningless?" Morrison interjected. "What if every battle, every sacrifice led to this moment? What if the war was necessary to teach both your species what peace is worth?" Dr. Chun's voice came through the communicators of all three ships. Captains, I'm detecting something unusual. Both fleets are powering down their weapons. Morrison felt his heart race. Without orders from their commanders, the ships of both fleets were making a choice. They were choosing to trust instead of threaten. My people are watching, Vexthara said, looking at her displays. They see us talking instead of fighting. Some are confused, but none are objecting. Mine as well, Crovin added. Perhaps they are as tired of this war as we are. Rodriguez pulled out his tablet one more time. General, Admiral, may I show you something? The display showed a map of the local sector, marking human colonies, Zephyrian worlds, and Korthok territories. Then it added the crystal formations, trade routes, and resource distribution. Look at this from a different perspective, Rodriguez said. Instead of seeing boundaries and contested zones, see opportunities. Your bioships could explore regions too dangerous for metal vessels. Korthik manufacturing could supply both civilizations. Human agriculture could feed everyone. Morrison added his own contribution. We could build something together that none of us could build alone. A civilization that combines the best of all three species. Vexthara leaned forward, studying the display, the crystal formations you showed us earlier. You would really give us access to them? In exchange for technology sharing and trade agreements, Morrison confirmed. Everyone benefits, no one loses. Crovin was quiet for a long moment, his organic and cybernetic minds working in harmony. My people have forgotten how to build anything except weapons, he said finally. But we remember the old knowledge. We could teach both your species to work with metals as we do. And we could teach you to work with living systems, Vexthara added. Our biotechnology could enhance your cybernetics, make them more efficient. And less invasive? Morrison smiled. Now you're thinking like partners instead of enemies. The next 30 minutes saw the most intensive negotiation in galactic history. 3 species meeting for the first time, hammering out the framework for an alliance that would benefit everyone involved. The breakthrough came when Vexthara made an unexpected offer. I propose a formal ceasefire across all contested systems. Immediate withdrawal to neutral zones, with human observers to monitor compliance. Crovin's response was equally surprising. Accepted. I also propose joint salvage operations to recover the dead from both sides. They deserve proper burial, regardless of species. Morrison felt tears in his eyes. These beings, who had been trying to destroy each other hours ago, were now planning to honor their fallen together. There's one more thing, Morrison said. This alliance needs a name, something that represents what we're building together. The Andromeda Cooperative, Vexthara suggested. 3 species working together to explore and build instead of destroy. Agreed, Crovin said immediately. Dr. Chun's excited voice came over the communicators. Captains, you need to see this. Both fleets are standing down. Weapon systems offline, shields lowered. They're actually doing it. Morrison looked at the time display on his tablet. 4 hours and 53 minutes since the Resolute had first made contact with the alien fleets. In less than 5 hours, humanity had ended a war that had raged for centuries. The formal peace treaty was signed aboard the Resolute, with Morrison serving as witness. The document established trade agreements, technology sharing protocols, and joint exploration missions. More importantly, it established the principle that cooperation was more valuable than conquest, as the alien fleets prepared to return to their homeworlds. Now as allies instead of enemies, Morrison stood on his bridge watching the transformation. Ships that had been trying to destroy each other were now exchanging technical data and planning joint missions. Captain, Baker said, her voice full of wonder, how did you know it would work? Morrison thought about the question seriously. I Didn't know it would work," he said finally. "But I knew it was worth trying. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply believing that people are better than their worst moments." The war that had raged for years was over. It had ended not with a final battle, but with a conversation between enemies who discovered they could be friends. And at the center of it all was a small human crew who had dared to believe that peace was always possible. Even in the darkest moments of conflict, the galaxy would never be the same.